I bought and sold 664 times before I retired at 27, and then I realised that while I had a lot of activity, my profitability would have been greater had I just kept a couple of dozen.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors, find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategy. I'm Tyron Shump, and in this episode on Property Investory, we're speaking with founder of the Millionaires Property Club, Kevin Young, who retired as a millionaire at the early age of 27. You'll find out how he accumulated over 600 properties in his portfolio and about the amazing life he's able to live now he has fulfilled his goals. Young has been in the Australian market for over 50 years. During that time, he has purchased more than 650 properties, become a millionaire under 30, and started his very own property club.
And I'm dedicated to achieving my goals. And I think most successful people have written goals. And when I started the property club 23 years ago, my goal then was to create 90,000 millionaires. So I think we actually have created a wealth creation record that'll be in the Guinness Book of Records soon with over 5,000. So that's what's driving me.
With so much experience under his belt, what does an average day look like for him?
Emails. Unfortunately, phone calls, text. I love it because it's a free club. I'm always getting people to come to me with questions of how to do this or how to do that. And it's great at 70 to be able to help so many people.
He's famous for being Australia's most successful property investor, but it didn't start out that way.
I've got more properties than anyone else in Australia. And I started out poor and I had to learn the correct way to do things, which is not the way that people are taught at schools or banks teach you or even magazines and what you see in the press teach you. So I reckon I've made more mistakes in property and finance than everyone, but from those learnings, I've been able to pass them on to club members.
Young's portfolio sits in the hundreds, a feat that few of us could ever imagine.
I bought and sold 664 times before I retired at 27, and then I realised that while I had a lot of activity, my profitability would have been greater had I just kept a couple of dozen. So I changed my philosophy when I was retired and stopped selling and just kept them. And then I drank the rising equity in those properties, which is really the fundamental lesson we've got in the club, is that you buy and hold, never sell, you just borrow the increased equity. And that way, the money you're spending is completely tax-free. And as Kerry Packer said, Australia's richest man, you can't get rich paying tax. And so what you've got to do it legally, not illegally.
Young's advice for any investor is to keep a balanced portfolio.
I think the second biggest mistake that investors make, and I'm talking about 8 out of 10 of them, they only retire on 2 or less properties, which means they're on a park pension and a poor life. You've got to diversify. And therein lies the big problem for the average investor, because they're comfortable with their own postcode, very uncomfortable buying outside it, and extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable if they buy interstate. Whereas, with the experience of the club, I look at all states all the time, and we have the ability to rotate to where we think it's coming out of a sleepy period and into a buy cycle. Whereas someone who's in that in the wrong area, like the example is Sydney boom between 2001 and 2004. The rise in prices then was greater than the price rise we had experienced recently. But then it was going to enter into its slow period because we knew there was a whole lot of growth coming through in construction. And with more supply, it would flatten out that rate of price growth.
With over 50 years of property investing experience and the well-established education base of his property club, Young is a definitive voice of authority for those looking to buy investment properties.
And so we moved our people away from Sydney for about 5 or 6 years into other areas. But if someone was investing in Sydney, they would have no other choice rather than keep on buying in Sydney and seeing no growth for that 5 or 6 years till it started to come around again. So, diversifying is the second biggest tip I can give anyone, but it's fraught with danger, and you really need a lot of research. And there's so many real estate agents out there that are property marketers, that are vultures, that get big commissions from selling overpriced properties in the wrong area for capital growth and the wrong area for tenants. And with the marketing money, they can get a lot of people to be little bunnies in the spotlight, really, of the truck coming at them. And they sign up without that research. Now, since 1999, we've been putting submissions to state and federal governments that would stop this completely. And we've asked them to do what we do in the club, and that is print off everything that's sold in that radius of the property. And it's in writing, so we can sue if it's wrong, but it gives a buyer good comfort that they know what prices are. And various state and federal governments are just refusing to introduce that very simple law, which would stop people getting ripped off, would enable people to buy outside their own postcode with confidence because they wouldn't get trapped.
Young moved around a lot in his childhood, but this only brought him experience with more properties and even more people.
My dad always rented and was a serviceman in washing machines and refrigeration. Moved around a lot. I think we moved about 16 times. I went to school first off in Candos, then in Cessnock, then in Hornsby, and then for my last 2 years in primary school, and then all of high school I was in Bega.
Oh, wow.
And I still got mates from primary school and high school from Bega. And in Bega, I led the only strike in Australian school history, by the way, but that might be another story.
Okay.
So then I left school in '64, and I stayed in the main roads department for about 12 months. And then I came to Brisbane for a holiday in the summer, thinking I'd be extremely hot and uncomfortable, and found that it actually is cooler in Brisbane. And as long as you get near the water, you can get a nor'easter. And so I moved straight into Brisbane. And lucky for me, I was always poor and my parents never had anything, so I had to work 3 jobs to get the money.
By working hard, Young eventually saved enough money of his own to begin his property investing journey.
I was just lucky that I bought at the right time, and you always get buyer's remorse. And 6 months, for 6 months, I worried that I'd bought the wrong sort of property. I'd bought it at night and I hadn't done my full research. I was compulsive and impulsive. Then I got contacted by someone who offered me double what I paid for it. And so I just picked, luckily, the right area and the right part in the cycle.
Okay.
And then I went and bought again, and again 6 months later, it doubled again.
Wow. And what year period was this?
That was about 1968 or 9, around there.
Okay. And was this in Queensland or Brisbane you're talking about?
Yes, it was in Brisbane, and I bought right on the outer edge, which I don't recommend. So I didn't have a list of rules then, and I just bought compulsively. And equally, I bought what I could afford, I suppose, as well. And so luck was on my side because I had a positive view of property beforehand, but really, really motivated me to get more involved in property then.
At such a young age, Young had to really work hard to begin his property investment journey. But luckily, things began to pick up from there.
I was 21. So, yeah, I had 3 jobs to get the money together to buy those first 2 properties. Then I bought some more properties, and I had built a milk run up and sold that for money. And then I built a bread run up and sold that for money. And that cash flowed me. I had $2,300 in the bank, and I thought I'll go selling property full time. So I gave them a notice at Social Security, and for 3 months, all I earned was $230. I'd made 1 sale, and my $2,300 was gone. And luckily, again, I would have been I was due to get the sack. I didn't know it, but I was due to get the sack with only 1 sale in 3 months. And I could have walked away with the tail between my legs if that had happened. But that weekend, as it would happen, I made 4 sales. And I was away. And within probably 6 months, I'd been continuously the top salesman for the organisation, and they promoted me to sales manager, the youngest that they'd ever had.
As some of our other expert guests here at Property Investory have thought, Young believes that the best education you can get in property investment is through life, not university.
I went to high school in Bega,
Yep.
and I was good at economics and maths, which you always use for the rest of your life. Had a great time there, but never went to university. I think people go to university so they can be employed by people who don't. I think the University of Hard Knocks is the best university. You learn on the street.
Although Young's father was never particularly interested in property, Young was never short of mentors in his youth.
My mum was all very keen on property and urging Dad to buy a house, and of course he never would. And we had a friend, George Britton, who was a real estate agent in Bega, and I just loved going down and listening to his stories. I think he thought I was interested in his daughter, but I was more interested in his stories, and he'd tell me that he bought, or someone had bought this shop or this farm or this house, and how many years later it turned around and doubled again within 10 years. And he had records going right back before the Second World War.
This influence from a young age gave him the inspiration and the information he needed to begin his property investment journey.
So I got a really good grounding in the facts that property does double every 7 to 10 years. And it amazes me now to look in the media and see them getting all hot and bothered about a property boom, will there be a bust, because property's doubled in the last 10 years. And it's a joke, because it always has, and it always will, because the population is going up, which is the demand, but there's no more land, and what's left, people want more money for it, and of course the capacity to pay is always going to go up. So don't believe what you see in the papers, obviously.
Yeah, the media tends to have a different point of view compared to what property investors do. It's good to keep a pulse on it, but at the same time, do due diligence, as you also have mentioned as well in that side of things.
We have national conferences every year, and I think we're coming up for our 23rd next year in March. But we've had some good speakers. One of them was Mark Burris from Yellow Brick Road and the TV show. Also, David Koch. And both of them said the same thing, when they're writing an article or for TV or radio or newspapers, they've got to entertain. And the more sensational it is, the better. And they don't see their job as an educator. And so this is straight from authority. Don't get your education from the media. So where does the average investor get their education from? And there's nowhere. We try to get a course into the New South Wales school system, and we tried for 6 months. I was going to get an economics teacher who we'd made a millionaire to go around all the high schools and teach them good debt, bad debt, how to manage their money, and how to focus on creating wealth early. It took 6 months. Then it came back from the minister, no, I was going to pay his fee and his car and his time to go around. They came back and said, no, because you might give someone advice and they might leave school and they might get bankrupt and sue the education department. So we were just dumbstruck. It was like, have these many hundreds of thousands of kids churning out every year, keep them dumb, don't educate them in how to get on in life and create wealth and avoid the traps. Because someone might come back and sue you.
I totally understand from that point of view. And I wish as well, when I went to school, I was taught those basic foundations of money management, debt, and also assets as well, assets and liabilities. And I think it would be a great thing if the school system just educated on the basics of those things, because there's so many kids out there right now who don't understand and they get themselves into a lot of debt and don't save. And then that's where they can't even start to invest into property, especially if you're living in Sydney or living in somewhere in Australia that has a very high cost of living, and the average price of properties are over $1 million. Then, you don't know where to start, because people go, wow, if you're earning an average of $70,000 a year and you see the properties at $1 million, how do you get into a market like that? But
it's very simple to explain to Tyrone, because they've got very complex things they're supposed to be teaching in schools, like safe schools and all the other calculus. I've never used that again, so I'll have school. But we find no matter what the IQ of people who come into the club, they grasp the principles very quickly because they're very basic, simple things. And people say, wow, that's pretty logical. Like I say, never buy your own home. The great Australian dream is the great Australian nightmare. And yet from the time they're even in school, before they even leave school, they're drummed into them, the first home buyer, you must get your first home. But it takes you 25 years to pay it off, and you're using after-tax dollars to pay it off. And you've got all the repairs and maintenance that goes with usually a poorer place that you bought, a cheaper place, an older place. And you wonder why you retire on a pension, because you've just gone down the wrong street.
Coming up next, you'll hear Kevin Young's very own rags to riches story.
But with no money, I had to scrimp and save, and it wasn't enough to get the deposit.
As well as the worst investing moment Young ever witnessed in 50 years.
And at the same time, I got onto this guy that was selling his milk run, and I got him to owner finance me.
As well as what aha moments sent Young grinning.
We predicted Sydney in 2000, and between 2001 and 2004, it went up about 23% every year.
The beginning of Young's investment journey was rocky to say the least, with little money and even less time. Young had to use all his skill and knowledge to even step into the Australian property market.
It's just that I had that yearning from when I was a kid, because I had the knowledge that we wanted to give everyone, and particularly kids at school. Keep an eye on the prices and you'll see it's pretty normal to double every 7 to 10 years. With low inflation now, we're saying it's more like 10 to 12 years. But with low inflation, you don't need as much capital growth for the same good lifestyle, so it sort of balances itself out. But with no money, I had to scrimp and save, and it wasn't enough to get the deposit. So I went and joined the Citizens Military Force. So Wednesday nights, I got paid tax-free dollars for that. Once a month, I'd have the weekend away, and I'd get tax-free dollars for that. And at the same time, I got onto this guy that was selling his milk run, and I got him to owner finance me. And so I worked 6 days a week on the milk run, come home, have a shower and go to work, finish work, come home and go straight to bed, wake up at midnight and go out on the run. It was 6 days a week.
Wow.
And on Friday nights, there was no sleep at all, because by the time you come home, you had to get ready, get the car and go in and load up with milk and go do a double run for a Saturday, for the Sunday as well. So at the end of that 12 months, I turned around and sold the milk run, which then gave me the cash to buy the first property. And I was still then working Citizens Military Force and my day job. And then I sold that for double the money that I'd paid for it, and used that cash to then upgrade to a better property. And again, it was a bit further out, and it was breaking the rules that I know now. But again, I was just lucky that the tide had turned in Brisbane. It was going through its up cycle. And of course, all areas go through up, flat and down. I could have bought when it was going in a down cycle and still be working at Social Security.
Yeah. And was that a residential property that you bought firstly?
The first one was an industrial one, and the second one was a residential one.
It's unusual for a property investor to swap from industrial to residential, let alone as their first purchase. But he believes that as long as you're careful, anything can be achieved.
Well, I don't recommend they do either, but I do like commercial and industrial, but you've got to be very, very, very careful in choosing it, because if you get the wrong sort of property, you could be without a tenant for 6, 12 months and go belly up.
That's right.
Whereas with the residential property, all you got to do is halve your rent, for instance, and you'd have them lined up around the block to take the property. So I'm aware that I'm using other people's money and their future in the club. So I've got to be careful that I just recommend gold bricks to them rather than more risky type of investment. So that rules out commercial and industrial.
Although he eventually doubled its profit, Young faced the challenge of finding tenants for his first property.
And it didn't take long, and luckily both times fortune smiled on me, I guess. So if you roll your sleeves up and work hard, you make your own luck, I think. But I was very lucky.
It would be interesting to know, because obviously from 1960s all the way to 2010s now, obviously, as you said, it's doubled over time. So it would be actually interesting to see, as you said, it proves the theory that property's doubling every 7 to 10 years, and it goes exponentially quite some bit. So would it be?
Yep, and both those properties have been subdivided since and completely changed in character. So had I not sold, I'm sure they would have been outstanding investments.
On a gold mine, I guess you can say.
Yeah, because the thing is, I guess, though, is that there's an opportunity cost in keeping it because I sold it, I was able to cash up and then grub stake myself into real estate with that $2,300. And had I kept them, I wouldn't have been able to go into property because I wouldn't have been able to pay my bills and live without any sales coming through.
Young attributes his choice to use property investment as his vehicle to success to his obsession with anything that he's passionate about, which in this case was property.
I think you stick to what you know, and I'd spent, from the time I was 11, I had a dream to get 7 properties. I had the picture of the properties on my wall. When we shifted, I'd take the photo with me. And so if you have an aim, you get there because there's 100,000 bits of information hits your brain every second, and it just goes and gets into a research department of your brain somewhere. But once you've written down a goal, it suddenly has a place to put relevant data. So this is all done subconsciously. So as the information comes flowing through to you, it sticks. And because I had the goal of the properties, every time I'd hear or see something about property, it'd hit my brain and stay there, and I'd write it down. And I think this is why people are fixated on achieving success. They've written it down and they're getting all this information that makes it easier for them to be success in their business. So if I think I was keen on selling ice creams, I would have written it down and then I would have got a whole lot of information on successful people selling ice creams.
This ability to sort through and retain any important information or goals is one of Young's principal teaching topics in Property Club.
And that's one of the big things we teach our members is write down a list. We call it the bucket list. Things you want to achieve today, but things you want to achieve this week, things you want to achieve this month, things you want to achieve in 6 months, things you want to achieve in 12 months, then 5 years and 10. And then put it in your sock drawer or your toilet drawer, wherever you can see it every day. And that reinforces it in your mind and it reinforces your subconscious to keep looking for these things that are relevant. And when I first met my wife, I got her to do that and she did it separate to me. Then we put it together. And she said, we'll never achieve that 12, what we've written down and agreed on in 12 months. We'll never achieve it. But because we had it written down and we focused on the things that made it easier to achieve, we actually achieved our 12 months goal in 6 months.
Wow.
So she became a quick convert to writing things down and having goals. And your goals can be all sorts of things. They could be money, they could be business, they could be family related.
This habit of writing your goals has proved effective over many of our guests and the people that they're helping. And as Young says, it's all down to your subconscious.
Particularly if you see it every day, and that's why it's got to be in your sock drawer or your toilet drawer, wherever your shaver is, or whatever that you see every day. And you've only got to scan it because your subconscious reads quicker than you do. And it just reinforces all those things on your list without taking the time to actually read them.
The worst property investment moment that Young has witnessed as the leader of the Property Club was during the GFC.
In the club, we have had one. It was a quite expensive development done on the Gold Coast, overlooking the whole of the Gold Coast to the ocean. It was a first-class development. The then Peter Vitti Premier opened it, and it was on the 6 o'clock news. And he said how best investments are high on a hill, pretty expensive, because they'll always be the most expensive. And with views, you can't beat them. Everything was fine, and I think our club members probably bought about half of the estate. And then the Rudd financial crisis hit, We never had a GFC. I just don't believe that. I can't believe that people keep saying there's a GFC. You go overseas and they say, what global financial crisis? It was just the Northern Hemisphere financial crisis between America, it wasn't Canada, and Europe. It wasn't in South America, it wasn't in Asia, it wasn't in New Zealand, it wasn't in Australia, it wasn't in China, it wasn't in India. Rudd overreacted and caused a banking monopoly here, and they misused their powers. And they foreclosed on a lot of people who had margin calls in the banks, in the stock market. So it caused one guy who wasn't a club member, he was a truck driver, to go bankrupt. And so there was a mortgagee in possession on his property, which I guess is one of his lessons. And at the same time, one of our members went mortgagee in possession as well. And he just hadn't listened to the advice that we'd given. And what we said to him was, I think he was 72. And we said, look, all you've got is your home. And if you want to get into property, it's risky, given your age and all the circumstances. But what we said we'll do is get you into a good quality property that will double in the 10 to 12 years. But we did a cash flow for it on it. And he might have been $100 a week short. So we said, what we'll do, we'll organise a line of credit just for that $100. So you won't have to put your hands in your pocket. It'll cover all your outgoings and you'll be fine. So I think that came to about $50,000 as a standby line of credit. The place came in and valued about $200,000 or $250,000 more than the price that we'd negotiated. Unbeknownst to me, he extended that line of credit for the full $250,000. And then here's a bit of a lesson for you. He did a silly thing. He was an architect. He went and resigned. He contacted his son in Canada and said, I'll fly you out business class, come and have a look at your dad. And he then also went about and spent $60,000 upgrading his home, which was in a regional country area, which is overcapitalising it, and never got that sort of money back.
Wow.
But at the same time, he stopped paying the mortgage and never contacted the bank, never said a thing to them. It led to a breakup of his marriage. She left him. And, of course, then the banks moved in and went mortgagee in possession. So those two events, mortgagee in possession sales, right with the Rudd financial crisis, really put a burning tire around that development. And prices are still stabilising now as a result of that. Because once the values go around in the future and they see something sold for 2/3 of what it should have, then that becomes the line in the sand that they use for valuation. So it's difficult for someone selling in the future to get more than 2/3 of their purchase price. That is definitely the worst experience that I've come across.
For Young, his several aha moments over 50 years have all come from predicting the booms of Australia's capital city property markets.
I've been in business 50 years, so I think I've worked for everything that I've got, so it hasn't been something to come to me like I've won the lottery or something. And I think capital growth, I put a lot of research into the area before we get that aha moment. So I know it's coming. For instance, when we started the club in 94, 95, I picked inner Brisbane and I said it's going to be flat for the next 4 or 5 years. And then it's going to double in the next 4 years. And I based that just on the supply that was coming into the market, the prices and the population movements and stuff. Because I was new to the members at that stage, when we'd passed through the 4 to 5 years of pretty flat growth, I think the prices were 136 and gone to about 186. They wondered whether that boom was going to come. But between 99 and 2003, property prices doubled. And then I turned around and said, well, they're going to double again between 2003 and 2006. And they did. And I've done that for every market around Australia. We predicted Sydney in 2000, and between 2001 and 2004, it went up about 23% every year. We've done it in Melbourne, Perth, Darwin, not Cairns. Cairns was a disappointment for us because it was caught by the road financial crisis, and the three major developers up there invested heavily in the share market. So when the banks used their monopoly powers to margin call, they had to sell everything to meet the capital that they'd borrowed, and the capital was then less than the value of the shares.
Therefore, that's the reason why he couldn't succeed in that development.
They had to force sell all their Cairns developments at fire sale prices to avoid going under. And two of them did actually go belly up. So with the flood of this stock on the market, Cairns really suffered. And we had a number of investors that had bought Cairns, not for an investment, but they liked the high standard construction up there and the idea of retiring there or having a property they could go to for 6 months of the year or whatever. So it didn't hurt them financially because it was part of a portfolio of properties and was organised around their retirement. So they had a pretty few lean years, about 4 or 5 years where just nothing happened. And Cairns now has just been rising over the last 3 years.
The aptitude for market trends resides with Young's high school love of maths.
I did higher maths at high school. I did maths 3, which is maths 1 and 2 combined. It's not many people do that. So I love maths, I love trends, I love using historical data and overlaying it over a lot of associated influences on prices. And basically, for your listeners, it's like this. I call it the story of bananas. Bananas are selling for about $2 a kg, but then the cyclone comes through and wipes out Queensland bananas. You've only got a limited supply coming into the market from New South Wales. With the limited supply and yet a rising population, what happens to the price? It goes from $2 to $17 a kg.
That's what happened.
But next year, when there's no cyclone and the batch of bananas are taken down, they come into the market and the price returns to $2. So that really is the understanding of everything. It's the supply and demand. So back in 2005 at our national conference, I was on stage, so it's videoed, so I got the proof. I became the only person in the world that would predict the American financial crisis and that cause of it. And I said it'll happen 3 years from today. And then I said 3 years and 5 months from today, the Australian share market is going to crash. And on song in November in 2008, the Australian share market crashed. And I believe that's the only time ever that it's crashed in November. And then 2011, I predicted this last Christmas share market crash. Although I was a little bit out, I said it would crash before Christmas Day, and it didn't. It crashed in the week after Christmas.
That was pretty close.
Yes, I've got all my predictions now up to 2021, but your listeners have to come to my conference to hear that. So I give my predictions out to club members who are bored or go to my conferences.
So, inspired by this story and what Kevin Young is excited about today, we will keep the conversation going in a future episode on Property Investory podcast, where we talk about how to apply the strategy.
And that's the secret of what our plan is never sell, but borrow conservatively your past annual increase for 1 year, which is very, very conservative.
We'll also discuss his mentors or lack thereof.
So I've never taken advice from anyone. I think it's just I've relied on the facts and figures. And when I was learning it, when I got into real estate, I had a nickname there called the Facts Man.
As well as where you can learn from one of Australia's most successful property investors.
The other one is I've got Asked Kevin Young.
All that and more in our future episode of Property Investory. To get the full transcript and see the show notes, visit our website at propertyinvestory.com.